Okay, good afternoon and welcome to today's Timely Topics. My name is Michaela Hartle, a program assistant at the Connecticut Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. And today we are joined by Matthew Riley, the Operational Excellence Manager at PuzzleHR, and he is here to discuss navigating career transitions. Matt, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michaela. I appreciate that. So make sure, did my slide transition work?
Yes, you are all set.
Awesome. Okay. So one, thank you everybody for joining today. Before we get started, just a quick little excerpt, I guess. So I'm going to apologize in advance to Rory. I took some of his classes and courses, and my slides definitely will not meet up to his standards. I had some computer issues, had to do this online, so hopefully my presentation skills can offset that. That being said, it's a good segue for kind of today's conversation of making sure you set yourself up for success. And then from the other side, making sure your employees are set up for success. So this presentation, this conversation today is going to be targeted not at searching for jobs, applying for jobs, interviewing for jobs. This is you've accepted a position, you've started there. How can I now set myself up for success? And then on the flip side, as an employer, what do you need to do to make sure when somebody starts your organization, they are ready to contribute and able to get up to speed fast and not be overwhelmed. So with that, we're going to get started. Who am I? What makes me qualified to talk about career transitions? So just a really quick biop of myself. 11 years military service, 10 of those as an officer, served in multiple units, served in multiple locations, have been kind of all over the world. Really South Africa and South America are the only places I haven't been. And why this is so important and significant to bring up is as an officer, the military is designed to move you around a lot. So about every 12 to 18 months as an officer, you're going to move from one role to another. And the idea is for an officer, it's important to you to have breadth because they want you to have a holistic picture. I say all this to say that they do a pretty good job of setting up the blocking and tackling and the basic things to be successful, but it's still challenging to move from role to role. And the military sets it up. The civilian world does not. It is dog eat dog, the best survive, and it's on you, and the ownership really belongs to you. So I have split my time in the civilian world about 6 years doing operations and human resources, pharmaceuticals, marketing, and right now an outsourced HR company. And as Michaela said, I've transitioned out of HR into an operational excellence role. So started off as a client-facing individual dealing with customers and managing their HR programs. Now I'm doing that internally for my own company. And this is just a quick timeline. So you can see in the last 13 years, I've had several transitions. All that being said, that doesn't necessarily make me qualified to talk about this. What does is I have made my fair share of mistakes, and I've been humble enough to learn from them. So some of these transitions have gone well, some have not. I encourage you when they don't go well, dust it off, move on, learn the best you can, and move on to the next one. So that's the lens I'm looking from. Today's conversation is going to be a combination of experiences, educational resources, and then a lot of this is going to come from the first 90 days. Has anybody read this or seen this, or familiar with this book? Okay, if you do not have this book, this is my copy. It's got so many highlights and notes and dovetails in it. I've read this several times. I highly recommend you go buy it. If you already have it, dust it off, read it again. I don't have a lot of busy slides. This is going to be my only busy slide, this next one. But this is why this is so important. This is, I think, on page like 2 or 3 in the introduction. Summarize this slide. Harvard Business Review, in conjunction with a bunch of folks, did a study. They followed a lot of leaders, 580 leaders, almost 20 years of experience between all of these. And you can see there's multiple transitions that somebody encounters during their career. On average, 1.3 transitions every year, whether it's a promotion, a transfer, joining a new organization. Some of those micro transitions that aren't even captured in this book, when you get a new boss, right? That's a new first 90 days for you because your new boss has new expectations. Your company gets bought. Your role hasn't changed, your company hasn't changed, but that's a transition. So being prepared and getting yourself set up for success is one of the hardest things to do. And the whole point of the first 90 days is to get you to that break-even point So you're providing value, you're no longer consuming value. And this book is great at giving some tips and tricks, things to look at, processes to use to set yourself up for success. This right here comes straight out of the book. We're not going to focus on all these today. We're going to focus on two. We're going to focus on gaining alignment and managing yourself. In my opinion, in my experience, these are the best places to focus. And I like how this diagram is because those really are the foundations for each one of those pillars you see. If you can gain alignment, then you're going to be better to match your strategy to your situation. And then you're going to know what learning you need to accelerate. And then for managing yourself, if you can set yourself up for success and manage your commitments, manage your personal life, manage all those ancillary things, it's going to help you set up to do some good wins early, and it will really help with team building. So real quick, I'm going to do a temperature check. Am I going too fast? Is this too much information? How are y'all doing? Good? Good, okay. Okay, so the first one we're going to talk about is gaining alignment. This is a STARS model. This is kind of the crux of the first 90 days. In this concept, in this theory, there are 6 stages an organization can be at. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of maybe forming, storming, and norming. This is a little bit more nuanced than that. There's a startup, turnaround, accelerated growth, realignment, sustaining success, and a hybrid. And the reason that hybrid is so important is because rarely are you ever truly in one phase, right? So you could be a startup, it's been 2 years, you're going into accelerated growth. The current company that I work at, we just eclipsed the 3-year mark. We have 700 clients and almost 300 employees, right? So we are still in that startup phase as far as structure goes and organization, but we have definitely hit the accelerated growth. There's different approaches you need to take. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is for you when you join an organization to identify what situation you're in, right? So if you come in, a lot of times startups will bring in people with experience from industries or bring in people who have related experience, but in a more mature company. And they'll say, hey, we need you to come in and bring that structure. We need you to come in and help set up what you had at your place here. If you come in with a mindset of just, I was told to do this and I need to put this structure in place, and you start off there, you are going to struggle. I can tell you because I did that once. I had a situation where I got brought into a startup. They said, we need structure. We need you to set up processes and systems for project management. I hit roadblocks everywhere I went because I didn't take into consideration where the organization was at. I started as if they was just copying and pasting from the previous organization. So not only is it important to know where you're at, but it's important to know what variations there could be. Another example from my past, I was managing a turnaround. In the process of managing that turnaround, our company got bought. So my department was doing a turnaround, the organization was doing a realignment. So having both those happen at the same time made it very challenging to make sure priorities were always aligned, making sure that my team was meeting the needs of the turnaround while meeting the needs of the overall organization. And so being brought into that department had 95% attrition. Every month we were less than 50% on our revenue goals. Those are just 2 of the highlights, but it was a struggle. And adding that complexity of a realignment on top of it just made it that much more challenging. So it's important to know how to do an analysis, right? And there are a lot of tools out there. This portion of this presentation is not designed to tell you which tool to use. If you've ever taken business classes or you've taken any type of seminar or education, you'll know that there's SWOT analysis, there's a PESTLE, there's the Porter's 5 forces. These are very useful. No one is better than another. It really just depends on what your situation is and what is going to match. If you're in a external facing role, this is probably a better opportunity for you to use or a better tool for you to use. If you're going to be in an internal role specifically focused on, like my new one, operational excellence, I'm going to be focused on a SWOT analysis, right? But the point is, it's important to know which tool to use, but more importantly, it's know where to start. So I've seen several people, let me go back real quick. For anybody who's done a SWOT or seen a SWOT done, you'll notice a lot of them have 1 or 2 boxes that are very full. And you'll notice some others that maybe have 1 or 2 items, right? That could be indicative of not knowing that material. It could be indicative of the available material. It could be indicative of what the organization's phase is at. Maybe they just haven't identified those things yet because it's too new, like a startup. But one thing that I would recommend, this is a very simple tool to overlay on this. It's not revolutionary. Who, what, when, where, and why. I know this seems very simple. It's not revolutionary, but watch what happens when we go back to the SWOT analysis and I overlay that with helpful and strengths. And I overlay it with weaknesses. And I overlay with opportunities and I overlay with threats. When you go to this level of detail in any one of those tools and you take the time to analyze each category, you'll notice pretty quickly how those boxes will fill up and you'll get a better analysis. You'll be able to make a better decision. Understanding your environment is the first thing you have to do when you started a new company, when you start a new organization. Very challenging to make good decisions if you don't have the whole picture. So highly recommend. It's a very simple thing. I'm a big fan of keeping it simple. The simpler the tool, the more likely you are to use it, the more likely the analysis is going to be helpful. So really want to emphasize taking the time to understand your environment. Next thing we're going to focus on is managing yourself, right? It's very easy when you start a new organization to be excited, to jump in, to volunteer for things, to be involved. I'm going to recommend temper that, slow down a little bit. This break-even point, this diagram is very linear. It's a straight shot. I can tell you that it's never this straight, right? And in reality, probably going to be some hiccups, probably going to be some backsliding. But if you're aware of that and you're taking the time to pay attention to where you're at and managing yourself, you will make that break-even point. And a great tool that I like, it's going to be the next slide. But this is a good example of what happens when you overcommit too soon. This is a great example of what happens when you jump into an organization eager and you try to just gung-ho, I'm going to bring everything I can. I've been hired to do this job, so I need to do all these things. There's a direct relationship between performance and stress. Some stress is good, but if you overcommit early and you don't know how to get things done or where resources are at, you're going to hit a wall real quick. And then you're going to start to get frustrated and it's going to be challenging. And you're going to get to that I give up mode and start looking for another job. Most companies are struggling with people quiet quitting. This is a perfect example of what that unnecessary stress causes and getting people to leave an organization. And that give up doesn't mean you've actually quit either. You could just not be showing up to meetings anymore. You could, phoning it in. You could be watching The Office in the background and having something move your mouse so people think you're online, right? So making sure you manage yourself can help you avoid undue unnecessary stress. Is anybody familiar with situational leadership? Has anybody seen this diagram before, been introduced to this concept before? No? Okay, see a few heads shaking now. I love this model. I was introduced to this recently. This is both from an employee perspective and from a leadership perspective. So the top is for employee perspective. The bottom is how to manage and coach people during that time. So D1 is what everybody starts off at, right? You don't know a lot, low competency, high commitment. You're excited to be there. You're volunteering. You're saying, I can help with this project. I can shadow on this. And you're trying to get yourself out there so you can provide value to the organization. D2 is the next phase, right? D2 is, some things, not a lot, but you know how to maybe do certain tasks you're supposed to do, maybe a few other departments or how things work, but your commitment's getting low. Your commitment's getting low is because you're getting overwhelmed. You have volunteered too much. Your excitement has got ahead of you, and now you are getting inundated with requests and opportunities that you thought were good ideas and you were going to have time for, but now you don't. Now it's time to do your actual job, and you're too spread thin. D3 is when you get to that high competency. I know how to do my job. I can get things done, but the variable commitment comes from that potential of overburdening yourself or committing too much, or maybe the organization hasn't set you up for success. Maybe the tools that you have are not the best tools to do the job that you need, and so you're struggling to get that done. You know how to get it done, but it's challenging. And then the goal is to get to D4. D4 is high competency, high commitment. You know how to get things done. You're an effective person in the organization, and you're driving results. So the idea as an employee is to know where you're at in that cycle. And it's not as linear as this. Like I mentioned in that curve earlier, some of these you're going to backslide. Some of these are going to be certain areas. Maybe it's not your entire job. being mindful of where you're at in your situation really is going to help you to understand your stress and say, you know what, it is 4 o'clock. I don't have any more meetings today. I need to go for a walk. I need to hang out with my dogs. I need to go for, dinner with my spouse. There's not a ton on me right now. I can afford to do that before I get myself in too much trouble. Um, a great example of this personally comes from my military background, where I remember I spent almost a year in training, and I showed up to my first unit and I was excited to get started. And for those of you who know anything about the military, when you first show up to a unit, they give you a week to 2 weeks of free leave. And that's designed for you to find a house, move your stuff in, get your kids settled, all those things. I was 25 years old. I was single. I had already rented a place. Everything I owned fit in my Jeep. So when I showed up, I was ready to get started. Captain Ward said, go home, take the week off. We have a ton of stuff upcoming. You're going to be busy in the future. This is time for you to be able to take advantage of. And me being 25 was like that. No, he's crazy. I'm ready to go. I've been training for a year. I need to contribute, right? Probably some of the best advice I ever got, because I got to settle in. I got to know the neighborhood. I got to meet people. And so it really helped set me up mentally to be able to have a network before I dove into it. And he was right. There was plenty for us to do once I did show up. So taking that time for yourself, I can't emphasize enough how important that is. Anybody have any questions about the situational leadership model or how this works? I feel like I'm just talking away at you guys. So I apologize if I'm going too fast. Okay, just some simple tips. I've said this before. I sound like a broken record. Do not overcommit. Overcommitting, you set yourself up for potential failure. There's nothing wrong with volunteering to shadow or volunteering to see how things are done. But if you commit to something that has a deadline and it's due on you, when it comes time to do your job, you may now be distracted. Avoid referencing your old job or position. This is a big one that a lot of people do. They feel that it helps give credibility. They feel that saying, I worked, in my experience at X place, we did it this way. If you do that too much, you're ostracizing yourself and you're separating yourself from the group. The last thing you want to do is separate yourself from your group. If your office wears plaid, guess what? Go buy plaid. If your office, goes out for drinks on Friday night, go out once or twice. If you don't drink, just take a Coke. You don't actually have to drink alcohol. You don't have to participate exactly what they're doing. But if you don't go, you are setting yourself apart from the group, and then you are going to struggle when it comes time to need things and need resources from individuals. So avoid a key one that people forget to do is they reference a job they had in the past too much. They reference a position they had too much. We just went over the situational leaderness thing. Be aware where you're at between D1 and D4. It's never going to be static. It's always dynamic. As more things come your way, you could backslide into a previous position or a state. You could get overwhelmed. That's okay. Just be mindful where you're at and take the time you need to take care of yourself, or go to the resource. One thing I haven't mentioned, a great thing is to have a mentor outside of your organization, because they can help give perspective when you go to them. In my HR days, I would ask people, what's bothering you? What's getting to you? And they're like, oh, nothing, I'm fine. And I would ask, well, if I went to your spouse, what would they say? And then they would just kind of laugh and they'd be like, okay, in reality, I'm bothered by this. If your only network for that is your family or immediate friends, you need to get somebody that's outside your circle to help you get through that. Confirm your priorities on a consistent basis. Every organization is dynamic. If you go in, you have a one-on-one with your boss, they give you a list of priorities and you operate off of that, and you don't change from that over a month, 2 months, you're in trouble, right? Things are going to change. Organization is going to change. The environment you work within is going to change. Who remembers having priorities February of 2020? By April of 2020, did those not change, right? So I know that's a little bit hyperbole. That's an extreme example, but those kind of things happen all the time at a macro level and a micro level. So consistently confirm your priorities. And the last one, don't be afraid to look dumb, right? So a lot of people come in, they think I'm a leader or I'm in this position where I'm supposed to be an expert. If you take that attitude and you don't need help, or you always say, yep, I understand that, it's not a good look. Just acronyms between even the same industry, right? Between different companies can be challenging to overcome. And I can tell you from my personal experience, several times I've asked somebody when they use an acronym what that stands for, And I got to look back and I'm like, actually, I don't know what that stands for. They're like, I know what it is. And then they'll coach me and teach me on whatever that system or process is. And that's a great opportunity to get people to want to like you. I mean, that's really your main goal in the beginning, is to get people to like you or to understand where you're coming from or respect you. And having someone teach you something is a great way to open up a doorway and open up a window into a new connection that can help you later down the road. So don't be afraid to look dumb. People like it when you're open and a little bit vulnerable, and it makes it easier to make those connections. So these are some just little tips when you first get started out. If you can try to do these, you're going to set yourself up on a good path to set yourself up for success. So managing yourself, recognize where you're at, understand where you are. Every situation is dynamic. There are no static situations anymore. All right, so we're going to switch from setting yourself up for success to how an employer needs to set up their employees for success. So if you own a business, if you want to start a business, if you're a manager in an organization, I think these are the three key things that you need to do to be able to have a healthy organization and a good experience for somebody who starts. We're going to go back to stars alignment. This is going to be a bit truncated since we've already talked about this, but I can't express, not only is it important for the employee to know where the organization is at, it's important for the leaders to know where they're at. I have had time and time again situations where the leaders misdiagnose the situation the organization is in. And when they do that, the decisions they make cause friction. When you as a leader try to say you're still in a startup and you're 5 years old and you have mature clients and use these as an excuse, we don't need processes, we're a startup, we're dynamic. That's frustrating when you get above 25, 50 people, right? If you're in an accelerated growth mode and you refuse to invest in the technology that's needed for your employees to be successful, there's going to be a lot of miscues. There's going to be a lot of balls that are dropped. There's going to be a lot of unnecessary stress on the organization. That's going to cause people to have attrition. And then that is a dangerous place to be in. Once you start to have attrition, it is hard to recover from. So as a leader, cannot emphasize enough, you need to, on a regular basis, take a temperature check and make sure your leadership style is matching the situation your organization is in. Has anyone ever heard the expression, to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail? No? And we want to take a guess what that means? Anybody had a leader who uses the same trick every single time, no matter what the problem is? They have one approach on how to solve problems. If you come into an organization and this is how we're going to solve problems, and you don't deviate based on the situation, or you don't adjust based on how your employees are behaving, how the organization is behaving, how the market is behaving, you are going to struggle and you're not going to be successful. That's just straightforward. Back to the situational leadership. I mentioned earlier, the top one is for the employee. The bottom is a leader, right? So when you recognize that an employee is in D1, you need to be S1. S stands for supporting. And so you need to be more directive. You need to be telling people what to do. You need to be encouraging, but more than anything, directing. Once you recognize your employees have gone from D1 to D2, now you as a leader need to go to S2. High directive, even more high behavior, right? So the more you can encourage your employees, the more they're going to set the stage that it's appropriate to encourage others. Great example. I had an employee who was extremely influential with the rest of the organization. You know, when a decision's made or a conversation happens, that one person everybody looks at in a room, or does that person agree with this decision, or does that person have an opinion on this? He was a very quiet individual, was not very forthright with ideas. In one-on-one situations, he would have suggestions, he would have ideas, but he never did it publicly. He came up with an idea. It was a good idea. It wasn't the best idea I've ever heard, but it was a good idea, and he did it publicly. I did everything I could to praise that idea publicly, everything I could to talk about how great of an idea it was and encourage him to take action on it. And when he did that, it didn't fail. More ideas came up in a public setting. They saw the person that they respected and influenced was respected for speaking up. So other people felt comfortable doing that. So that's the kind of example of like high supportive. Once an employee gets to D3, this is a critical make or break for employees, right? So if you're not supporting them appropriately, if you're not giving them the type of feedback they want, some people like public, some people like private, Some people like gift cards. Some people like an email that gets sent out to the organization. If you're not supporting them correctly, this is the make or break for them to either go to D4 or fall back to D2 and quiet quit. So S3 is probably one of the most important things you can do for an employee, is to make sure you're supporting them when they hit that stage. Because that variable commitment, they're probably 3 to 6 months into the organization minimum, maybe longer, right? Probably longer. And if you lose that employee, you've just lost the money you spent to recruit for them, any sign-on bonuses you've done for them, the time you spent training them, the resources and licenses you set up for them. So D3 is a critical point to make sure that you keep the good employees, and that you're moving them to D4, and that way they're autonomous. Once they're autonomous, you delegate, you give them supportive behavior. It's not necessarily as much, because they know they're appreciated. I think all of you would agree, when you're given more responsibility, you feel appreciated, right? Doesn't mean more work, but when you're given more responsibility, you feel appreciated and you're more committed to that organization. And that's the idea to get to D4 and S4. Any questions on this at all? Okay. Okay. Everything else you've seen so far is either materials I've been exposed to or read about or researched on my own. This is something that I've put together that is my kind of structure and thought process. And when I'm talking with clients, when I'm talking with individuals, how to manage to make sure they have the building blocks set up. So this right here is designed to read left to right, top to bottom. So left to right, left is current state, right is future state. So on the left side, this is where you're going to get to the more tactical, the more day-to-day, exactly what your employees have to do their job. As you move to the right, this is where it gets more complex, and this is where you're starting to meet where your organization is moving to, the things you have to pay attention to in order to get to that next level, to get to the state you want your organization to be in. From top to bottom, it gets from basic task, more complex task, even more complex task, and then the things that if you don't have in place in your organization, doesn't matter how great your strategy or communication plan is, it's not going to work. So thinking about this from the perspective of a new hire, from bringing somebody on and making sure they're successful, right? You have to know, for this specific role that I hired someone for, I need to know the task and the projects that they're going to do, right? And projects could be another, use whatever term is appropriate for your industry. This is just a generic term to kind of do a catch-all. You need to know the task they need to do and the type of projects they're going to work on in order to build a good job description. If you don't have a good job description, you will not be able to attract the right talent for that job. Great example. I had the department I mentioned earlier that had 95% attrition. We had technician level work that we were hiring college grads for. And so we were telling these college grads, you're going to work in a lab, you're going to get to do all this scientific things in clean rooms. They had biology degrees, they had chemistry degrees, they had these advanced degrees. But in reality, they were driving an hour and a half, putting on a clean room suit, pushing a few buttons on a piece of equipment to collect samples, and then driving home. And then other people got to test those samples. Once I got into that role, it was pretty simple. People were quitting because we're overselling this role and we're hiring the wrong talent. So understanding the task and the projects helped me to better understand what the job description needed to look at. I got rid of the college degree, and I got rid of previous experience required, right? And attrition almost overnight got fixed. We still had lingering effects from people that had been hired before, but since then, anybody that was hired stayed on for several years, made it a lot easier to manage that work. When you've got that high of attrition, you're just constantly in churn and you cannot focus on the business because you're just focused on recruiting and you're focused on training. Doing that also helped me set up the organizational design. We had individuals who were going out to clean rooms, were also setting the schedule. If you're in a clean room, you can't take a cell phone or a laptop in. How are you supposed to manage client communication and manage a schedule? Can't. We hired one role, managed it for the whole team. Once I understood the job description and the organizational design, that's when I can actually create process flows. I can't create a process flow or commitments to clients until I understand how the work flows, not only through my department, but through the entire organization. And until I can have that, I can't come up with SOPs or appropriate employee incentives. Because if I don't know how it flows through, then how am I really going to build a good training on how to do this job? No job sits with just one person, right? You have multiple departments, you have multiple areas of expertise that are needed to complete your service or project. So in order to do that properly, you've got to be able to know how things flow through the organization, what the job descriptions are, and then what needs to be done. And so if you can get through the first layer at the top, then you can move to the second layer. Then you can move to the third. What a lot of people do is they want to jump straight to the training and SOPs, and they miss those middle pieces, and then it's incomplete for the individuals. And when they join, the training and the SOPs aren't helpful because it doesn't actually explain how to do things. In my current role, we are an outsourced HR company. We built an SOP to provide onboarding services for a client. We built the SOP to start the minute that the employee had accepted an offer. All the stuff before wasn't taken into consideration in the SOP. So when they implemented that, there were tons of issues and problems because we didn't have a filter to get it to us. We didn't take it, that department didn't take into consideration the upstream activities and processes that would impact theirs. So if you just build an SOP or training or SOP, sorry, that was redundant. If you just build your training on focus on one thing, you're going to miss the whole picture. And then that's going to be frustrating for your employees, and they're going to hit D2 and D3 real quick. And then you're going to lose them and they're going to quiet quit. So going through this process to set your employees up is critical. So as many bad things as you could see, accountability that is driven from the top, but it is more about holding people to the mistakes they made and not coaching or encouraging. It is patronizing people who may not be the best at the task, but because the stakes are high, we're just going to delegate them to something that's unimportant, and then we're going to put more work on other people. Who here has been on a team where you end up doing all the work and then nobody else does anything, right? And it's because you don't feel they can do it. That's not holding people accountable. There was refusal to accept that people are human, right? They just jumped straight to the fact you made a mistake. You made 5. I made this rule, this arbitrary rule that 5 is the limit without consulting anybody to know what the real metrics were, right? So this was a very fear-based culture of accountability. And what it ended up doing to the employees, they spent more time trying to figure out how to get around it than actually doing their jobs, right? And so when you put in parameters in place like that, you're just going to force your employees to focus on other things than doing their work. I'm going to end on this. This is a great story that I love. A good book called Crucial Accountability. If you haven't read that one, I highly encourage you to read that as well. And there's a story about a study they did, and they did it at a movie theater line. And so what they did is they went out and they interviewed several folks, and they said, hey, if somebody skipped you in line, what would you do? Right? And to a fault, almost everybody said, well, I'd tell them to go back in the line, or I'd say something to them. And so what they did is they staged this movie theater line, and they had people skip. Almost nobody said anything, right? And so after the movie theater, they interviewed the folks and like, why didn't you say anything? It wasn't a big deal, didn't matter, didn't impact me that much, right? So then they redid the experiment again, and they had somebody skip, but they staged someone that they skipped in front of, and they politely handled the situation. They said, hey, I don't know if you noticed this, but all of us have been waiting in line. The line starts back there. If you don't mind, go back. And what they did is, again, they staged this. So every time the person was like, oh, my bad, I'm sorry, of course, and they go to the back of the line. They interviewed folks and they said after the movie, did you notice that? They're like, yeah, didn't mean that much to me, wasn't that important, but I did see it happen. So they did it again. And this time when they had somebody skip after that encounter, they had someone else skip somewhere else in the line. And there was, if I remember correctly, it was somewhere between 60 and 70% of people held that person accountable, and they used almost the exact same language verbatim as the successful example of holding someone accountable. And what the lesson from that is when people witness accountability done correctly and professionally, it empowers other people to hold people accountable. So in your organization, if you are holding your team accountable and you're doing it professionally, you're not doing it like Dwight, you then will empower your other employees to hold each other accountable. And there's a higher success rate when you do it that way. So I cannot emphasize enough how much a culture of accountability is important, especially given the remote nature of work now. You don't get to see your employees every day. You're relying on the results that they produce. And so if you can create a culture that does that, you can rest assured that your employees who are not on site are still working and still producing. So that's the story I'm going to end on. Those are those are the experiences and the lessons I wanted to share today, and just end on, do your best to be humble. When you make a mistake, dust it off, move on, learn from it. If you don't have the first 90 days, go out and buy it. If you got it, dust it off. And anything else that y'all have questions on, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you so much, Matt. I do want to open up the floor to a quick question or two. If you guys either want to unmute, throw something in the chat. Matt, I know you have a couple positive feedback comments in the chat. Or if you feel more comfortable, you could wait until afterwards, and Matt and I can hang on in the Zoom room if you guys want to ask any questions there. So I'll pause for a few seconds and see if we have any questions.
Michaela, I'll take a question.
Mm-hmm.
Matt, thank you so much for all this great information. Regarding the overcommitting point that you made, I just wanted to know if you had any kind of extra tips regarding that, just like drawing the boundaries and overcommitting.
Yeah, so I can give you a good one that's recent for me. So I was approached, I started at PuzzleHR in April of last year, and by March, I was approached by the VP of our department to be a supervisor in the department. They're like, you got a lot of leadership. We need that in this organization right now. Again, we're growing. And I politely said, hey, I appreciate it. I'm flattered that you came to me. I go, but to be a supervisor, in my opinion, you need to either, one, be a subject matter expert, two, know how to get things done in the organization. And the best supervisors can do both. And I was like, I've been out of HR for several years. I haven't been here long enough to know how to get things done here yet. So I was like, so right now I appreciate it, but I'm gonna take a little bit, I'm gonna take some time to get myself acquainted with the organization. Sorry, I had a little brain freeze with the word there. And she was completely understanding, and she's like, wow, those are great points. I didn't think about that. And then less than a month after that, they came and approached me again, and they said, hey, we've got a project we'd like you to work on. Can you work on this project? Which was a much lower commitment, right? And so that is actually how I segued into my current role, was doing a few internal projects. And after doing that, which was a much better fit for my skill set, I was able to transition into the current role I am. So part of that managing yourself is know what you're good at, know what you're not good at. And when you're approached with an opportunity or you're approached to do something extra, if it's not a good fit for you, just be honest.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
Great. Okay. So I do want to remind everyone that this session was recorded and it will be up on our website. And Matt also put his contact information up on the previous slide. You can also reach out to us at CCEI or me personally, and I can connect the two of you. So I do want to say thank you so much, Matt, for coming and delivering this as well as preparing this. There are so many valuable points that I'm confident everyone can take away at least one, if not multiple points to try to implement into their daily lives. So thank you so much for that.
Yes,
and I do want to remind everyone that we do have another Timely Topics coming up on Monday, February 27th at 2 p.m. with Olivia Mott. And she's going to be saying that Cakes isn't just a company, it's a movement. So please join us then. And have a great rest of your day, everyone.